We are 2 months away from the election. This is for Houston's next mayor. A top concern for voters, crime. This is according to a new survey by Kinder Institute for Urban Research and Houston Landing. Joining me this morning to talk more about this survey is Eileen Grench, public safety writer for Houston Landing. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Of course, thanks for having us.
We appreciate your time. You know, when I was reading crime being a top concern, a big priority, I really wasn't all that surprised, but break it down for us. What does this mean to people, crime? Well,
you know, crime has kind of bubbled up as an issue again. In the last decade, you know, it's kind of been it's kind of dropped out of first place, right? Because we had the coronavirus pandemic, we had Hurricane Harvey, we had a lot of other kind of crises that have kind of taken the limelight. And I think what I also heard from experts is that it's quite common for crime to become a top issue again during an election year.
So I understand you wrote an article that breaks down concerns within this survey. You found that 8 in 10 Houstonians think it's very important the next mayor take action on crime. But I know Houston Police Department numbers show crime is trending down. So what do you think is contributing to the focus on public safety among these people surveyed?
Well, what we do know is absolutely, you're right, 100%. Crime is huge for Houstonians right now. What we also have kind of learned is that, like I said, during election years, often crime becomes an issue because it's something that, you know, the city can directly impact. And I think people know that. At least that's what I heard from researchers. I also kind of understand and heard from experts that in an election year, you know, oftentimes crime kind of comes to the top because it's also a good kind of tactic and talking point for candidates. But again, we're kind of coming out of a bunch of other crises, and crime has risen back up. And, you know, we didn't really dig into that in the survey necessarily of exactly what that means. But when I spoke with people, everyone resoundingly said, yes, they care about this.
A lot of issues certainly to tackle. Does the survey explain whether participants want a tough on crime approach, or would they prefer more of that community policing approach?
You know, this was a really surprising result from this survey for researchers. You know, they put out these two options, as tough on crime, community policing, as two things that can, you know, often can be polarizing, right? But surprisingly, almost half of Houstonians that were surveyed said that they wanted both.
Both?
Both.
Yeah. With that, did they comment on interactions with police?
Well, you know, what they told me when I started chatting with people around the city, you know, was that, like, number one, they want to be in communication with police, you know, they want to have like
that community relationship.
Absolutely. And, you know, they also want to know that folks will be brought to justice, have, you know, all their rights will be cared for, but also brought to justice when they do something wrong. You know, it was really interesting. A lot of, you know, one person in Northeast Houston told me, you know, it was really important for their community for cops to both bring people to justice, but also to be accountable to their communities. And I think that they don't see those as diametrically opposed.
And being present too, I know, you know, depending on, regardless of the law enforcement agency you speak with, officers, deputies, they will tell you that it is important for them to also be in these communities, not just during a time of need, but also on a daily basis to get to know their constituents, to get to know their neighbors.
Yeah, and that's what, you know, communities want too, from everything I've heard as a reporter and also what I've heard from researchers.
Okay, so last month you wrote an article about a father-daughter duo over in 3rd Ward who decided to tackle public safety on their own. And they organized routes within the community, within the neighborhood, to check for dim streetlights, which we know has a direct correlation to crime throughout the neighborhood. How does their story connect to the data that you are seeing come through this survey?
So first of all, this father-daughter duo, they're really amazing. They really took this upon themselves to take what was at the time the #1 public safety priority for Greater 3rd Ward, which was lights. And sometimes, you know, you may not think of lights as public safety, but it was for that neighborhood. And so they tackled it. They made a map. They found all these lights that were out covered, and they got a lot of them turned back on. What was interesting, you know, seeing the results of this survey was that actually, you know, folks who said, neighborhoods where folks most said that they felt less safe walking outside at night had a direct correlation with folks who also said, you know, I want better streetlights, I want better sidewalks.
Yeah, and when you look at that too, I remember early on in my tenure here at KPRC, I did a story it might have actually been a story that came from this survey, and there, you know, it showcased the correlation between, you know, empty lots, overgrown lots with crime, and you know, the lack of streetlights in those areas.
And that's what I was hearing from experts. Infrastructure is huge, you know, and you know, while they said, you know, sometimes people might perceive crime that isn't there, whether it's real or perceived, infrastructural adjustments help, you know, helping neighborhoods feel safer, like walking just, you know, on the sidewalk can make a huge difference for communities.
It's very impactful. It certainly is. I want to go rogue for a moment. Did the survey touch upon our stray population at all? And the issues with stray pets throughout the city and the crisis plaguing shelters and those sorts of things?
I think that it may have touched on that, but I can't say for sure because I was focused on crime.
Okay. Well, listen, you can come back anytime you want. It's been awesome getting to talk to you this morning. We do appreciate your time. Eileen Grench, thank you very much.
Thanks for having Houston Landing.